A quiet night covered Earth when the signal came. In the control room of a deep space listening station, a man named Dr. Elliot Ray sat sipping cold coffee. The room was filled with blinking lights, screens showing stars, and the soft hum of machines. Nothing unusual had happened in weeks. He yawned and looked out the window, where the stars stared back at him like silent watchers. Then, a sharp beep broke the silence. A red light blinked on the main screen. Dr. Ray frowned and leaned closer. A signal had appeared, weak, old, and full of static. But it was there, coming from somewhere far beyond the edge of known space. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. He tried to track it. The computer struggled but gave a location. The signal came from a deep space region known only by number, Sector 94X, a dead zone with no known planets, life, or stations. He called the night shift team. Within minutes, 5 people gathered around the screen. They listened as the signal played on loop, soft, broken, like a voice crying through a storm. It wasn't in English, but it didn't sound like any known alien language either. Strange symbols appeared in the data, ones that didn't match anything in Earth's database. Then something happened that made everyone freeze. In the middle of the static-filled message, a clear line in English played. "Help us before it's too late." Chills ran down everyone's spine. Dr. Ray sent the recording to the Global Space Command within minutes. The next morning, news of the signal reached the United Nations Space Agency. A special emergency meeting was called. Leaders, generals, scientists, and top translators sat in a large room, watching the signal play over and over. Questions filled the air. Was it a trap? Was it real? Why was part of it in English? No one had answers. One expert said the signal had been traveling for hundreds of years. Another said it might be only weeks old, but disguised to look ancient. Theories clashed. Tempers rose. But one thing was clear. The signal was not natural. It was a call. A desperate cry for help. The president of the Earth Council stood and looked around the room. "If this is real," she said, "and someone out there is asking for help, then we must decide. Do we answer?" Many were afraid. What if it led to war? What if it was a trick? But others argued that this might be humanity's first real contact with intelligent alien life. Not an enemy or a passing ship, but a connection, a plea, a need. Outside the meeting room, across the world, the signal spread. News channels covered it. People listened to the broken voice and whispered of ghosts in space. Some called it fake. Others believed it was the beginning of something huge. Children watched the stars with new wonder. Soldiers cleaned their weapons, just in case. Far above Earth, in the orbiting space station Titan X, Commander Alina Voss received her orders. A mission was being prepared. A small, fast ship would be sent to follow the signal. A crew of 5 would go, skilled, brave, and ready for the unknown. They would be the first to enter the sector where the signal came from. The ship was named Pathfinder. Back in the deep space station where the signal was first heard, Dr. Ray stood alone again, staring at the stars. He played the signal one more time. The broken alien words filled the room like whispers from another world. Then that one line in English came again, soft and haunting. "Help us before it's too late." He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" But the stars gave no answer, only silence. And somewhere, far away beyond the dark, something watched. The launch was quiet, but the world held its breath. The crew of the Pathfinder stood together in the narrow hallway before boarding. 5 humans, each chosen not only for their skill, but their ability to handle the unknown. Commander Alina Voss, the leader, was a calm and focused woman who had spent years exploring deep space. Beside her stood Dr. Marcus Lane, a brilliant scientist with a soft voice and tired eyes. Lieutenant Cora Jane, a tough soldier trained in alien combat, checked her weapons without a word. Engineer Louis Maddox, young and always joking, kept looking back at the ship with excitement. And finally, Dr. Hannah Sorrell, a linguist and expert in ancient languages, carried only a small tablet and a curious look in her eyes. As they entered the ship, cameras watched them. Reporters outside the launch station whispered about what might happen. People around the world stopped what they were doing to witness this moment. It was not just a space mission. It was a leap into the unknown. Once on board, the crew strapped in. The countdown began. When the engines ignited, the ship lifted smoothly into the black sky, disappearing among the stars. The Earth became smaller behind them. The Pathfinder moved faster than any ship before it, powered by a new experimental drive built for long jumps between stars. Inside, things felt calm, but strange. Time moved differently in space. Days became quiet stretches of tasks, tests, and waiting. The crew kept busy. They ran systems checks. They studied the signal again and again. Hannah tried to break the code in the alien message, searching for patterns. Marcus studied the data from the region they were heading toward. The others kept the ship running and prepared for anything. On the third day, the dreams began. At first, no one talked about them. But one morning, Alina woke up with cold sweat on her back. She had seen something in her sleep, a tall figure made of shadow, standing beside her bed. It hadn't spoken, just stared. The feeling it gave her wasn't fear, it was deep sadness. At breakfast, she noticed Cora looked pale. Nightmares? Alina asked quietly. Cora hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, something watching. Whispering. I don't remember the words. Marcus admitted the same. Louis tried to laugh it off, but even he was quieter than usual. Only Hannah hadn't had a dream. She looked around at the others and said, "Maybe the signal is doing this." "What do you mean?" Louis asked. "The brain hears more than the ears," she explained. "What if the signal carries something? Not just sound. A feeling. A memory. Something deeper." Marcus frowned. "You think it's alive?" "No," she said, tapping her tablet. "But I think it came from something that was." The next day, they crossed into Sector 94X. Everything changed. The stars here looked different. Dimmer. More distant. There were no signs of planets, no comets, no movement at all. Just silence. The Pathfinder slowed down to search the area where the signal came from. Suddenly, the screen showed something. Floating shapes in the dark. Wreckage. Hundreds of pieces drifted silently in space. Metal, broken parts of ships, pieces of buildings. Some were massive, like entire towers torn from a city. Others were small, like fragments of machines. One large piece looked like the wing of a giant spaceship. It had markings on it, symbols that glowed faintly. Alina ordered the ship to stop. "Bring us closer to that wreck," she said. As the Pathfinder approached, lights scanned the surface of the debris. No life signs, no power, but there were signs of battle. Burn marks, melted metal, and deep claw-like scratches across some walls. Cora looked at the screen and whispered, "This was a war." They decided to explore. Louis and Cora put on suits and floated out to the wreck. The others guided them by voice. Inside the broken structure, they found long halls, empty rooms, and strange writing on the walls. Some doors were sealed shut. Others were open, showing rooms filled with dust and floating items, untouched for years. Then they found a body. It was curled near a control panel. Its skin was gray-blue, its shape tall and thin, with large eyes closed forever. It wore a suit, and its fingers were still touching the screen. Hannah tried to read the symbols beside it. One line kept repeating, and she translated it slowly. "Warning, they are still here." Back on the ship, the temperature dropped slightly, even though the systems were stable. The lights flickered once, and Marcus looked up sharply. "Did anyone touch the reactor?" he asked. "No," Alina replied. "Why?" He stared at the screen. "There's a spike, like something passed through the hull, but the outside sensors show nothing." The team went quiet. Then a soft voice crackled over the speaker. It was not from anyone in the crew. It said only one thing. You came too late. Silence had weight in deep space, but here, in the shattered remains of Sector 94X, that silence felt alive. The Pathfinder drifted slowly among the ruins of a civilization long lost, its lights scanning the wreckage, the ship's hull creaking as if reacting to the ghost of something long gone, or something still present. Inside, the crew stood frozen after hearing the strange voice. It had come through their internal speakers, yet none of their systems showed any incoming transmission. The logs didn't even register it. You came too late. Alina ordered a full system check, but everything was normal. No signals, no transmissions, nothing. The ship, by all readings, was alone. They weren't convinced. Cora double-checked every weapon on board. She didn't speak, but the tightness in her jaw said enough. Lewis stayed unusually quiet, running tests on the ship's sensors for anomalies. Hannah replayed her recordings of the alien script they had found earlier. Every time she heard the voice again in her head, it made her chest tighten, like it wasn't just sound, it was something crawling through her thoughts. Marcus, the scientist, suggested it could be a residual echo, a kind of automated message left behind by whatever species once lived here. Like a digital ghost, he said. Maybe a warning. Maybe just a last breath. But Hannah shook her head. It wasn't a recording. That voice was speaking now. They all felt it. Alina made the decision to send a drone deeper into the wreckage. The drone was small, fast, and carried high-definition cameras and scanners. It zipped through the dark, broken halls of the alien station while the crew watched its feed from the bridge. What they saw didn't make sense. The interior of the alien ship looked intact, too intact. While the outside was torn and floating in space, the inside looked untouched by time. Metal walls shone with a faint glow, and long hallways stretched in strange directions, some turning sharply with no clear end. The laws of physics seemed twisted. Rooms floated upside down. Doors opened to black voids instead of corridors. It was like the wreck itself was changing. Is this real? Lewis asked. It's real, Marcus said, his voice low. But it doesn't follow our logic. Then the drone entered a chamber filled with lights. Floating orbs of color hovered in the air, moving slowly like they were alive. As the drone approached, the orbs pulsed. The cameras caught flashes, images of planets, stars, battles, and screams. Not sound, just visuals burned into the screen like memories. Then the feed cut. Just static. Alina cursed and tried to reconnect, but the drone was gone. Then the lights inside the Pathfinder flickered again. A whisper passed through the hallway, not from the speakers, not from the comms. It came from behind the walls. Everyone looked around. No one said a word. Louis ran a scan for life forms. Again, nothing. But then, he saw it. Just for a second. On the reflection of one of the screens, a shape stood behind him. Tall, thin, eyes glowing faintly blue. When he turned, nothing was there. His face turned pale, his hands shaking. I saw it, he whispered. Something's with us. No one laughed. No one questioned. Alina took a breath. Suits on. We're going in. She led Marcus and Hannah toward the same wreck the drone had entered. Cora and Lewis stayed on the ship, monitoring. As the three floated through the ruins, they entered the same twisted hallways. Their suit lights revealed symbols, broken panels, and black stains on the floor that didn't look like rust. Hannah moved to a glowing wall covered in writing. She reached out and touched it. The light responded, glowing brighter. Lines of alien code began shifting, translating slowly before her eyes. A single sentence appeared. You were not supposed to come. The wall beside her cracked open like a door, revealing a room filled with floating devices. In the center floated a cube, humming with energy. It looked untouched by time. Hannah stepped closer. The cube glowed with her presence, And suddenly, her helmet speaker filled with overlapping voices, speaking in dozens of alien languages. But beneath them all, a single voice in English whispered, "They heard us. They followed the signal. Now, they're here." Suddenly, the cube shut off. The lights died. Marcus called out, but the comms cut out. Back on the Pathfinder, Lewis and Cora watched as their teammates vanished from the scanners. And in the darkness of the ruined ship, something moved. Something old. Something that had waited a very, very long time. Darkness surrounded them like a living thing. Hannah couldn't see her own hands, even with her helmet lights on. The walls had gone cold and silent, like the wreck itself was holding its breath. Her earpiece was full of static, no voice, no signal from Alina or Marcus. Just that soft hiss that made her feel like something was breathing nearby. She took a step forward, careful not to drift too far. The cube was gone. The glowing symbols had vanished. It was like the room had changed the moment she touched it. Hannah tried to speak, but her voice echoed oddly, bouncing off the walls in a way that didn't sound natural. Far ahead, a soft glow appeared, red, pulsing slowly. It moved. She followed. Back on the Pathfinder, Cora and Lewis stared at the blank screens. Their scans no longer showed the 3 crew members inside the alien wreck. The ship's instruments hadn't failed. Everything was working perfectly. But it was like the Pathfinder could no longer see what was inside the wreck. Like the people they had sent in had stepped into another layer of reality. "We lost them," Lewis said, voice tight. "They're not dead. They're just gone." Cora didn't speak. She walked to the weapons locker and took out a rail rifle. She checked its charge twice. Then she looked at Lewis and said, "If they're not back in 1 hour, I'm going in." Lewis didn't argue. Inside the wreck, Commander Alina Voss and Dr. Marcus Lane had also lost contact with Hannah. They had entered what looked like a control chamber, massive, dome-shaped, with walls made of dark metal and strange crystals. At the center was a broken throne-like structure, with wires trailing off into the walls like roots. Floating above it was a projection, a star map of the galaxy. But something was wrong. Entire sectors were darkened. Others flickered like damaged data. One part of the map pulsed red over and over. Marcus stepped forward and touched the projection. It zoomed in. A small symbol blinked in the center of the red zone. Earth. Around it were dozens of other icons, marked with what looked like the alien version of lost, dead, or taken. Alina's voice was sharp. "This isn't a map, it's a warning." Suddenly, the projection changed. It showed video, footage, glimpses of destruction. Alien ships being torn apart by invisible forces. Cities crumbling under strange blue storms. Beings screaming without sound, their bodies fading into light. And then, Earth, burning. Marcus stepped back. These people, they sent that SOS to anyone who could hear it. They weren't asking for help. They were begging someone to stay away. "But we came," Alina whispered. Meanwhile, Hannah followed the red glow through twisting corridors. The path led to a chamber with glass walls. Inside were hundreds of pods, tall, narrow, sealed. Some were cracked open. Others were shattered. She moved closer and looked inside one that was still intact. A creature floated inside, its eyes closed, breathing slowly. Its skin was gray. "You were not supposed to find us. You were not supposed to see." Marcus whispered, "We came to help." "There is no help," the voice replied. "Only silence, and the end that follows." Alina stood, facing it. "Then tell us what happened here. Tell us what we're facing." The being looked at her and said, "You already carry it." Cora didn't wait for another warning. She suited up, checked her rifle again, and stepped into the airlock without asking permission. Lewis tried to stop her with a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off with a single look. The kind of look that said, "They're my crew. I'm not leaving them behind." The hatch hissed open, and she launched into the void with a single push. her suit thrusters fired, guiding her toward the alien wreckage. All around her, twisted metal floated in the dead silence of space, like the shattered bones of some great beast. But the moment she crossed into the shadow of the ruins, her helmet lights flickered. Her comms died. It was, "We are already dead, but through you, maybe someone else won't be." And then it vanished. The lights went out again. Everything went black. But in that blackness, a voice, Marcus, spoke in a hollow, echoing tone. "I saw it. I saw them. They don't want to destroy us. They want to wear us." And somewhere, far away, a shadowed figure took its first step into Earth's reality. Through the signal that never stopped broadcasting. Through the gate that never truly closed. And through the humans who carried it home. The Pathfinder drifted aimlessly, its systems glitching with every pulse of power. Cora had no idea what to do. Inside the wreckage, something had changed. Alina, Marcus, and Hannah were still missing, their last coordinates buried in corrupted data. The ship had become a ghost, its lights flickering in time with her own heartbeat. And every time the silence was broken, it wasn't by a voice. No, it was by them. The creatures. The echoes of something ancient. And something worse. Cora had dragged Hannah's limp form into the airlock, but it was clear that the worst of whatever happened inside the alien ship was still creeping through the walls. She checked the life support systems again. Normal. She checked the external sensors. Blank. Nothing was outside the ship. Nothing except space, cold and black. Except it wasn't nothing. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. It was just there. As if the air itself had started to carry a voice, but it was a voice without words. A feeling more than anything else. Cora's skin crawled. Every inch of her skin screamed to get out of the wreckage and back to Earth, but she couldn't leave without the others. They were still alive somewhere. She had to believe that. She grabbed the comm unit again and tried to call Alina, but only static came through. It wasn't random static, though. It was distorted, like there was something trying to push through it. A sound. A pattern. "You're not alone." Cora recoiled at the voice that wasn't hers. It was deep, alien, with an undertone of cold fury. It wasn't from the speakers. It was in her mind. "I know you hear me." It came again, only stronger, more demanding. Her pulse quickened. She tried to calm herself, but her breath was shallow. She felt trapped, surrounded, despite being inside the Pathfinder, a ship that should have kept her safe. The voice came again, this time louder, almost human. "You will bring them back, or they will never leave." The ship shook violently, throwing Cora off balance. She grabbed the nearest handrail, her heart racing. The walls around her seemed to pulse, as if something was pushing against them from the inside, something trying to break free. And then she realized, it wasn't just a voice, it was a warning. The same message, repeated over and over, but it was clear now. It was directed at her. She grabbed Hannah, who was still unconscious, and moved quickly to the control room. The ship's systems were faltering, glitching with every command. The stars outside the viewports seemed to blur. Space itself looked wrong, as though it was warping, bending around the ship. And that's when the light changed. A cold blue light washed over the ship, illuminating every corner, every shadow, casting everything into sharp relief. The light seemed to come from the wreckage they had discovered, yet it wasn't coming from any of their sensors. It was different. Cora set her jaw, gripping the rifle in her hands. She wasn't going to wait any longer. She was going to find her crew, no matter what it took. And then the voice spoke once more. This time it was different. "You cannot outrun fate." Cora turned, almost in slow motion, and saw something that stopped her heart. Through the darkened corridor, moving as if part of the shadows themselves, were shapes, tall and thin, humanoid but not human. Their bodies shimmered in and out of focus like a mirage, and their eyes glowed a deep, unnatural blue. And they weren't alone. Behind them, Dragging through the air like smoke was the body of Alina. Her limbs hung limp, her eyes closed. But there was something wrong. Something alien. Cora's blood ran cold. She fired her rifle. The bullets tore through the air, but when they hit the shadows, they didn't explode. They sank into them, like they were absorbed by the very darkness. The beings didn't flinch. They didn't speak. They just watched, as if they were waiting. Cora stumbled back, the rifle slipping from her hands. Her voice cracked when she spoke. No, no. The beings didn't approach. Instead, they circled Alina's body. Slowly, methodically. They were speaking to her, or perhaps with her. Words she couldn't understand, but there was a thread of recognition that ran through her thoughts, a deep terror, like a memory she hadn't lived yet. Then, slowly, Alina's eyes opened. And they weren't hers anymore. Her eyes were glowing the same eerie blue as the creatures around her. Cora stepped back, her chest tightening. "You are not ready," the voice in her head said. But it wasn't the voice of the creatures. No, this was a new voice, calm, soft, and yet brimming with something ancient. "But you will be." The air around her seemed to distort. The walls began to warp. The ship's lights dimmed, flickering as if trying to resist whatever was happening. Cora dropped to her knees, clutching her head. The pressure was unbearable. A feeling of endless weight crushed her chest as the floor beneath her seemed to dissolve, slipping away into nothingness. And then, as quickly as it had started, the distortion stopped. The ship was still. Cora opened her eyes, blinking away the darkness. She wasn't sure how long it had been. Seconds, minutes. But when she looked up, she saw something far worse than the creatures themselves. Alina was standing in front of her, her body still, her eyes glowing with that alien blue light. But this time, Alina wasn't alone. Behind her, the other two crew members, Marcus and Hannah, stood, their eyes also glowing with that same blue light. Their movements were mechanical, as if they were not themselves anymore. "They're not gone, Cora," the voice in her head whispered. "They've become part of us." The connection had been made. The door had been opened, and what had started as a simple mission for humanity's first contact had turned into a race against time, a race for survival against an enemy that had been waiting for them all along. But it was too late. The gate had opened. The door had been crossed. And now, it was humanity's turn to face the consequences. The Pathfinder trembled again, as though the ship itself was caught between two realities. Cora's pulse thundered in her ears, and her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. The faces of her crew, the ones she had called family, stood before her, their bodies stiff, their eyes glowing the same unnatural blue as the alien beings that surrounded them. They no longer seemed human. They were something else. Alina, Marcus, and Hannah didn't speak. They just stood there, unmoving, their bodies as cold and still as the metal walls around them. The glowing blue in their eyes was not just light, it was life. But not the kind of life that Cora had known. It was something older, something that felt alive in a way that sent a chill down her spine. But it was what they weren't saying that frightened her the most. What did they do to you?" Cora whispered, her voice barely a breath. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands trembling. You're not really them, are you?" Alina's lips moved. At first, Cora couldn't hear the words, but then they came, sharp and clear. "We are part of them now, Cora." Cora's chest tightened as the weight of those words settled on her. Part of them. The alien race that had once warned humanity to stay away. The beings whose destruction had rippled across the stars. What had she done? What had they all done? She stepped back, eyes darting around the wreck. The walls shimmered, pulsing with that same eerie light. She had thought it was the wreckage, thought it was part of the ship's malfunctioning systems. But now she realized the ship was no longer malfunctioning. The ship was alive, and it was calling to them. The beings around her, silent and still, made no move to stop her as she backed toward the control panel. She needed to think. There had to be a way to stop this. She couldn't let her crew become nothing more than puppets, controlled by an alien consciousness far beyond their understanding. Cora gripped the control panel, trying to access the ship's systems. But the moment her hands made contact, the entire room seemed to pulse with a sound, a deep, resonating hum, like the beating of a heart. The floor beneath her feet vibrated. She could feel it in her bones. And then, a voice. The voice spoke again. But this time, it was not in her mind. It was real, echoing through the wreckage, vibrating the very air. It is too late. Cora's breath caught in her throat. You are already here. You are already part of the fold. Cora spun around, eyes wide, trying to find the source of the voice. The creatures still stood unmoving, their gaze fixed on her. The others, the crew, remained still, silent. The ship, once a wreck, was no longer just a lifeless shell. It had become something more, something sentient. The alien race had never truly died. It had simply evolved. And now it had found its way to Earth. It had found its way to humanity. And humanity's first contact was nothing like they had imagined. Cora's mind raced. She could see it now, the connection. The alien ship, the ancient race, the technology that could bend time and space. It was all coming together, falling into place. The crew had unwittingly triggered something ancient, something that had been waiting for a host, for a vessel. And the vessel had been them. Cora turned back to her crew, now standing in front of her, their eyes glowing with that same unnatural blue. They were no longer just human. They had become something else entirely, something far beyond her comprehension. But Cora was no stranger to fear. She'd been afraid before, afraid for her crew, afraid for the mission. But what she felt now was something deeper, something darker. This was not just about survival. This was about the survival of humanity itself. I won't let you do this, Cora said, her voice shaking but steady. You're still human. You can still fight this. You're not. The voice interrupted her, cold and unyielding. We are past fighting. We are part of the fold now. And soon, so will they. Cora's heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The others. Earth. The rest of humanity. They were next. Cora's gaze flicked to the control panel again. The hum had grown louder, vibrating through her chest. The ship's power was surging, but not in the way it should. It wasn't a malfunction. It was the ship feeding. It was feeding on the crew's energy, on their souls, using them as a gateway to the rest of the galaxy. It was using them to open a door to Earth. Cora's breath hitched. She couldn't fight it. Not alone. She needed help. She needed. A sudden thought struck her. The experimental drive, the one they had used to warp through space, had been the catalyst. It had caused the rift. But it had also left a mark, a trace, a connection to the alien race. If she could reverse the engine's polarity, if she could disrupt the warp field, they could close the rift. They could stop the invasion before it ever reached Earth. But there was no time. The ship was already too far gone. The beings were already moving, spreading, ready to take what they had come for. Cora reached for the control panel again, fingers flying over the keys. The lights flickered one last time as the hum grew louder, stronger, until the ship itself seemed to vibrate with the power of it. The gate had opened. The door had been unlocked. And as Cora's hand hovered over the final command, she heard one last whisper in her ear. You cannot stop what has already begun. And with that, the voice was gone. Cora's finger pressed the button, and the ship shuddered. A blast of light consumed everything. The walls melted away, and for a moment, Cora thought she was falling through endless darkness. But she wasn't falling into nothing. She was falling into something. A new world. A new reality. And just before everything went black, she saw the stars. And she saw them burning. Earth had been breached, and the war for humanity's survival had just begun.